Hello and welcome to Breakfast All Day. I am Christy. That is Matt. That is Alonso. I'm so excited to talk about this next movie because it is just a complete blast. It is called The Go-Go's. It is about the Go-Go's. And Matt will describe it. Or Alonso will.
No, I
Alonso.
we all look alike to you. I see how it is. So yeah, the Go-Go's. This is premiering on Showtime. It is directed by Alison Ellwood, and it's basically a look at the groundbreaking all-female rock band who sort of grew out of the LA punk scene, but quickly sort of turned themselves into this multi-platinum pop combo that pretty much changed music forever. They had 3 studio albums. I tend to forget that. They had 3 studio albums, and then it was all over. And this is a documentary that sort of takes you through the typical stuff of why it's all over, the money and the fights and the touring and the stuff and the things that most bands have to contend with in one way or another. But as the Go-Go's have buried all hatchets, and they've toured together a bunch over the last few years, and you get to this really interesting look at this kind of moment in the culture as viewed through these women, and they're all featured in the film. They're all very frank and forthcoming in their interviews. Some things I didn't know about. I didn't know about Charlotte Cafe and the heroin, but it does a really cool job of first of all, amazing archival photos and footage. As Dave was telling me, this was these people, that era of LA punk, everybody was documenting everything. So you see these shows at the Mask Club where baby Belinda Carlisle and Jane Wiedlin are in the front row, watching somebody else perform. But then they also kind of do these little sort of animated sequences where they show you how We Got the Beat was written and how Our Lips Were Sealed was written. And it's a cool way to sort of demonstrate to those of us who are not songwriters and don't really understand that process, how these elements get put together and these pieces come together to create a hit song. I was fascinated. I've always been a Go-Go's fan, but this movie is just I was loving all of it. It's super entertaining, and really just kind of this notion that you could have an all-girl band where they played their own instruments and they wrote their own songs, and that had never happened before. And to this day, no band like that has ever reached #1 on the albums chart. And that people were assuming that, they'd be fighting each other all the time and stuff. And it's no, they were friends, and for the most part, until they weren't, they were, they kept the friendship going. And then even after things fell apart, they all came back together because they do like each other and they do like working together.
Matt?
Yeah, I like this a lot. There's a lot of fun stuff going on here. It's another great example of how the way the punk scene developed in the early 70s, or I'm sorry, late 70s, and almost as as this kind of poke in the eye against progressive rock, oh no, we're gonna get back to basics and have fun. And it's fascinating hearing about who started the band and replacing members over the years. And there's a lot of pretty candid discussions. It does leave some stuff out. They don't really get into some of the lawsuits that happened much, much more recently, especially with Kathy Valentine. That's only 5-6 years ago. But that being said, this is a good, it's not quite warts and all. Maybe it's just warts.
A wart.
But it's pretty, it is they're all pretty honest about, where their fuck ups were and what they've done and how they felt. And it's great to see. I will say, every time I see her do something, I think Jane Wiedlin has a picture in her attic somewhere that just gets older and older.
She's so cute.
Yeah. And, having had the great fortune to have met her at a Comic-Con a few years back.
Me too.
Yeah. She, and it's cool to see all of them, right? It's great to get this idea of when Gina Shock comes in and Gina's look, we're going to take this shit seriously. Everybody else is kind of just screwing around, and she's
Gina
the one.
Gina Shock opens her mouth, and she's like a John Waters character. Her Baltimore accent is still so thick.
Oh my God! But she's, hearing her, she's like, oh no, we're going to practice. We're going to take this, like, we're going to work.
It never hurts to rehearse more, I think is what she says all the time.
Right. She's like, rehearsal only makes you tired. Right. And she's not wrong. Right. Yeah. And, you know, it's a great example of seeing how touring can wear down on you. That's really fun to see. And they're, you know, like I had known the story about Jane Wheadland co-writing
Our Lips
Are Sealed with Nigel Terry.
From the special.
But it was great the way that they talked about that. Yeah, it's fascinating. I really, really like this. And the way, as much as I dig the old pictures, I dig that they're playing these super old recordings that you hardly hear anymore in that raw sound. And like, I love how they walk you, like you were talking about, Alonso, like how they walk you through taking the original version of Vacation from Valentine's old band and reworking it. And you get to hear the different layers of pieces, you know, and then hearing like how Valentine taught herself to play bass and all that stuff. Like
that's a great story.
This is a terrific documentary, and it's absolutely worth seeing.
One thing I thought was interesting too, from a geeky music perspective, is that Jane Wheadland co-wrote Our Lips Are Sealed, but because she's not a classically trained musician like Charlotte Caffey is, that's why the chord changes are so weird. Like, because she didn't write it from a perspective of knowing what she was doing. She just
didn't
thought
know what
this
she
would
didn't
sound
know.
cool. And it's so specific and so singular. So I thought that was kind of a cool insight.
I like that. One of the things I would have liked in that would be like, give us an example, right? Give us a little bit of why that's so unusual.
What does that actually mean?
Right. Like, no, you know, nobody goes from this chord to that chord, right? But that's, you know, we're music geeks.
So I got to preface everything I'm going to say by saying that, like, I'm completely the target audience for this movie. So when I was 9 years old, Beauty and the Beat is the first album I ever went and bought with my own money. Wow. I walked down to the Warehouse Records on Ventura Boulevard in Encino with Jenny Steinfeld and her older sister, Lisa. I also got the single of Twilight Zone by Golden Earring that day. Very, very random day in 1981.
That's a good single.
It's such a memory though. And you know, you never forget like the first concert you went to, the first album you bought. So it's a real seminal memory for me. I felt like a totally grown up kid. And the cover of that album, as playful as it is, like it seemed really naughty. Like they're only wearing towels. All they have on are towels and facial masks.
It was sexy and anti-sexy at the same time. It was kind of
But then the towels get returned.
Yeah,
Macy's, right? Like somebody unknowingly had those towels.
Right, that's amazing. So I really loved it. I had all three albums. I love every single song on Beauty and the Beat is still so great. So if you were a girl growing up in LA in the early 80s, like there was nobody cooler than the Go-Go's. And Martha Quinn makes a really great comment in this where she says like they were the perfect fit for MTV, that they came along right when MTV began. And think about how that video for Our Lips Are Sealed was on all the time, and going back and looking at it, it looks like it was made for about $5, you know. Yeah. But it's so like exuberantly joyful that they made you want to hang out with them and be them at the same time. And so this movie really captures that joy that first existed, but also has a great deal of candor, and the way Alison Ellwood has each of them look straight into the camera, and each woman tells her story and her remembrances of how things went down is quite disarming. And they are very candid, you know, with decades of perspective and time about what went right and what went wrong. And it's interesting that even though they were, you know, this first all-female band to write their own songs and play their own instruments and have their album go to #1, they didn't necessarily view themselves as feminists. They didn't feel like we're on this feminist crusade. It's like, yeah, we kick ass and we happen to also be women. And so they thought, why can't we do all the things we want to do? But record companies, of course, were, you know, misogynistic, short-sighted assholes, yes. and yet they persevered. I didn't know that Gina Shaw had a relationship with Jane Wheadland. That was interesting. It's interesting, yeah, that the candid things they discuss now, like Charlotte Caffey's heroin addiction, and interesting too to see in retrospect that it's all still fresh, right? This is 40 years ago. almost. But like Gina Shock still gets choked up talking about what it felt like to be sidelined, even though everybody in the band acknowledges that she immediately made them better. She brought them into a whole different level with her drumming. And that Kathy Valentine was so devastated because all she wanted to be was a go-go. And then like, where do you go from there?
When Gina and Kathy remember the meeting where the band breaks up, like verbatim, both of them separately, it's like, okay, that's stuck. That's stuck.
Yeah. Or when Charlotte's talking about the songwriting and like songwriting is who she is. And, you know, yes, probably the money has to have gone into that. And that's what really causes a lot of tension, as all the time it does. But part of it is just like, she's a songwriter. That's who at that time she talks about. That's how she defined herself. And it took getting sober for her to be able to get past that.
It's interesting. This movie hits all the infighting notes as you, one of you guys, as Alonso, I think you mentioned, like the highs and the lows and the drugs and the booze and the egos and the pressures and the touring and the nonstop demands. But because these women are so candid and so funny, you know, and like kind of profane and kind of brash still to this day about
kind of like you would hope they would be.
Yeah. Right. I mean, like it cuts through the formula and it makes it feel alive and so fresh and makes you appreciate these songs all over again. One thing, though, and Matt, you kind of touched on this a bit, is that because we have so much detail about the beginnings and about the breakup and how really acrimonious and painful that breakup was, all of a sudden they're back on stage together at the Whiskey, and they're all smiles and they're working on a song together and they're singing together. And it's like there's a piece missing. It's like there's a chapter missing. Like, who initiated that reunion and how awkward was that? And what did they say to each other? And how do they feel about being on stage again? And like some of them, you know what they're doing now, but like, what are they doing now? So it just feels like, it's like, there's not quite enough. Like I want to know how that happened.
That's
Don't
fair.
you?
Yeah. Another 10 minutes, I think would have helped. And you know, I love a doc where even the people who, you know, either were shitty or were maybe treated shitty still come on and talk, like on the Walter Mercado doc, where like the guy who ripped him off is in the movie. Here you have, you know, Margot, who's one of the founders of the band, who was like, I signed up to be in a punk band. I don't want to be in a pop band. Leaves. She's in the doc. The woman who was their manager early on, and who then they ditch when they think, oh, well, we need somebody who can handle us on a more global scale. And then they come to regret that. She's in the doc. So it's always great to have those voices represented.
I also like that they talk to what's his name from Rolling Stone, Chris Connolly, and they talked to Miles Copeland, who managed them for a while, and they talked to Stuart Copeland because they were opening for the Police.
Oh, 1982! And I wanted to go to that show, and it was on a Tuesday night, and my parents wouldn't let me.
Oh my God! You should slap your parents for that.
To this day, I'm gonna dig them up and slap them. To this day, I'm asked about missing that.
Oh my God! But like that, they all like. They're not in the Hall of Fame, right? And it is kind of shocking. It is kind of shocking.
Yeah.
And I love this. I mean, there's so many great stories, and I'd love to see what was on the cutting room floor for this, because they all have just amazing stories, and you could probably get a whole other episode. There goes part 2 about the last 10 to 15 years about them settling their differences, and more stories about touring and what they've all been doing individually. And
I love Jane Wiedlin's solo albums. They are barely touched upon here, but they're great. I think there's some really great songs on all of them. Rush Hour, a pop classic.
Oh, World on Fire is a terrific track.
Inside a Dream, like she's created some.
We're fanboys.
Yeah,
it's interesting too, though. Along those lines, like they don't necessarily pull Belinda Carlisle out and make her seem special for having the most successful solo career or the most fame as a solo artist. Like she is regarded in the same way they all are in terms of their stories mattering. And, you know,
I suspect that was probably part of the deal with all the other ones. Like, you're not going to make this about fucking Belinda and we're just in the background, because we've been there.
Right.
We've done that.
We don't see the Mad About You video or the Heaven's a Place on Earth video. Like, we don't see any of that, you know, which is fine.
Who directed the Heaven is a Place on Earth video, Christy?
Oh, I don't know.
Diane Keaton.
Huh.
Really?
Yes.
That's strange.
Yeah.
One of the things that strikes me about Carlisle is that it's a little bit like Roger Daltrey in The Who, right? Like lead singer, front of the band, but not the driving force behind it, right?
The creative,
like,
yeah, exactly.
Right. Like The Who is Pete Townsend, right? And the songwriting and kind of musicality is as much as the rest of the Go-Go's that it is Belinda Carlisle.
Sure.
Like she's not she's not a Sting of that band, right?
I was reminded like why it made sense for REM to credit all four guys for all the songs, because then that way you split the publishing and it doesn't become that thing where like Gina gets frustrated because she's getting paid a lot less than Charlotte, like that sort of stuff. Like and again, I'm sure there's a billion different ways to negotiate that, and each band has to figure out their own. But it's like, oh yeah, that could be a real sticking point later when the checks start getting really big,
Yeah. Anyway, I really enjoyed it. I'm saying 8.
Yeah, I said, what did I say? I don't remember.
8.5. You said
8.5.
Yeah, I give it an 8 as well.
Do you? You said 8.5, Matt.
Oh, did I?
You did.
I'm sorry, 8.5. I also give it an 8.5.
8.3 is our number. It's on Showtime. It's really fun. It'll take you back.
For sure. Yeah, check it out. And I did not know while they were filming the Our Lips Are Steel video, they were just trying to get arrested so they could film that, and it didn't happen.
I love that. Can't get arrested in this town.
But we drive by that fountain all the time.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for watching. Like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/BeFastAllDay. This week, find out what we think about Shudder's new horror film Host, which was filmed entirely in quarantine and via Zoom. We're talking about it to our Patreon folks exclusively. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.